Hello, my name is Matthew Diemer. I'm an associate professor in the Educational Psychology and Educational Technology program here at Michigan State University. I'm recording this video abstract to tell you a little bit more about a paper we have forthcoming in the Journal Analyses of Social Issues and Policy, or ASAP. And the paper is titled Best Practices in Conceptualizing and Measuring Social Class in Psychology. So in essence, what we've written is a paper we jokingly call a social class for dummies paper. So we provide a lot of concrete guidance about how to best practices in thinking about and measuring social class, with extensive tables that have specific examples of different social class measures and references for further inquiry if you're interested in a particular measure. So the paper has a lot of concrete guidance and hand-holding for the interested reader. We had a couple of motivations in wanting to write this paper. One of the more disciplinary motivations was that other fields such as sociology and economics have much more of a history of being careful in considering and measuring social class, and they've really outpaced psychology to a large extent, and education as well. And so we wanted to try to sort of make up this social class gap a little bit, or social class sophistication gap, by doing this. And one of our reasons for doing this is a lot of psychologists don't have a lot of training in how to think about and conceptualize social class. And so a lot of psychologists are graduating from doctoral training programs without a lot of tools in order to do this. So we've written this paper to try to give people some tools in order to think about and include social class more in their scholarship. And one of the other motivations for our writing this paper is, in our eyes and in many people's eyes, social class poses a huge unobserved variable problem or confounding variable problem in psychology. So one of the best examples is people often would measure poor and working class African Americans, compare them to a sample of middle class whites, look at some outcome and then make an inference about the difference between those two groups as being due to race. And what we don't really know is, because it's an apples to oranges comparison in terms of social class, whether it's race, social class, or some interaction between those two things, it's maybe accounting for those differences. So it's important to be careful and to think through these differences carefully. In terms of what's covered in the paper, there's been so much written. Earlier I had said there's a gap in psychology, so there's some notable exceptions. And people have done some really good work to link social class to domains that are of interest to psychologists, such as physical health, age of onset of asthma, mental health in children and youth, K through 12 educational outcomes, quality of school you attend, post-secondary outcomes, vocational outcomes. So we know that social class is associated with a lot of things that are of interest to psychologists. So to help illustrate how psychologists can do this better, we review two of the primary traditions in social class, the first of which is the SES tradition, socioeconomic status tradition. And in this tradition, the researcher pretty much says to the participant, I'm going to define your social class for you. And the holy trinity, or triumvirate, of the ways people have used the SES tradition in the past is to look at measures of occupational prestige. These are kind of layperson's judgments of how prestigious different occupations are, where a surgeon might be a very prestigious occupation, and someone working as a sanitation worker would be a less prestigious occupation. Occupational income is another measure that's commonly used, and one of the most commonly used measures is parental educational attainment, or in the case of an adult, their own educational attainment. So this is the SES tradition. We kind of review in the paper in several tables how these measures are used, what's most appropriate for youth versus adults, and as well as how to think about measuring poverty with some of the different poverty measures that are out there, such as the federal poverty line. So many of you might be familiar with that when the Census Bureau publishes their poverty estimates every October, as well as a newer measure that's unofficial but also used by the Census Bureau called the supplemental poverty measure, which is gaining some traction in the policy world as perhaps a better measure of poverty because it's more sensitive. The other big tradition we cover in the paper is the subjective social status, or SSS tradition. And in this tradition, the participant in the study defines what their social class is for themselves. So one of the most famous ways this is done is Nancy Adler's ladder technique, where people rate their social class standing or perceived standing on a ladder in comparison to other people in society. Also in the subjective social status tradition is William Liu's social class worldview model, where people's conceptions of social class get into the brain and sort of shape their personality, their worldview, their culture, and the way they approach the world. So these provide ways for psychologists to think about how psychology is mediated through the brain, or excuse me, how social class is mediated through the brain. So that was what's covered in the paper. In terms of teaching, I wanted to touch on that a little bit because I know some people might be interested in using this paper in teaching. I've delivered some guest lectures and classes about this, and also have delivered a training at an advanced training institute sponsored by the American Psychological Association. And in this training, it's composed mostly of advanced graduate students, postdocs, and early career faculty. I kind of use this paper as a template for the workshop and provide some guidance about how to think about and measuring social class in different research populations. And the training's been very well received, and I think the reason for that is there's a real thirst or hunger in psychology to improve the way that we conceptualize and measure social class. And so I think this paper helps to fill some of that need, and I hope you find that to be true for you as you read it as well. So in terms of accessing the paper, there's going to be an electronic copy made available via the journal's website, the Analyses in Social Issues and Policy website. And I hope you find the paper interesting and useful for your purposes, and wish you happy reading.